Hello, biology. This is 23.3. 23.3, continuing on with genetics, and just a little review. From yesterday, we talked about the father of genetics, who is Gregor Mendel. We talked about a form for a gene for a particular trait would be an allele. If you have two identical alleles, then it's said to be homozygous. If you have one of each or two different ones, then it's said to be heterozygous. Whenever the dominant one shows up, that's called the law of dominance. And the one that doesn't show up as often, that's called the recessive trait. The actual combination of alleles inherited for a particular trait would be the genotype, and the way that it shows up in the physical characteristic, the actual thing that shows up is the phenotype. The law states alleles for each trait separate randomly. That's the law of segregation. The law that basically says the blending or mixing of traits, that would be incomplete dominance. The law that basically says that when one separates into a certain type of cell or one is inherited, then the other one is not. Sorry, I had no idea what I was saying. Braden interrupted me. I was talking about law of independent assortment. I'm not sure where I left off, but anyway, the law of independent assortment shows that the segregation of one gene doesn't really influence the other. And then linkage, where one type of heredity can influence the other. All right, so 23.3. So we talked about before about dominance, and the dominant trait usually shows up in the offspring, but incomplete dominance showed us that it doesn't always show up. A mixture may show up. So let's look over on page 483 first and talk about incomplete dominance. That's where it might be a mixture. So if you have a particular type of flower that has one allele is red flowers and the other allele is white flowers. For incomplete dominance, it's going to show up in the offspring as a pink flower. For codominance, all right, so they're working together here. They're equally as dominant. For codominance, they would show up with red and white flowers. You've seen some of those gorgeous flowers that are both red and white there. So that's the difference between codominance and incomplete dominance. Back to page 482 to talk about allele frequency. So one of the things that geneticists do is they want to study allele frequency. So basically, the book uses the example of six fingers. The six finger dominance, I think it's called polydactyl. It's actually a really dominant trait. So how many people do you really know, though, that have six fingers or six toes? And so basically they're showing that allele is just not frequent at all. However, on the opposite side, cystic fibrosis, that allele is very frequent. About 30,000 Americans are affected with cystic fibrosis. It's a very common hereditary disease. And 1 in every 3,500 white Americans have this disease. That's a big deal. I mean, that's a big number there. And so it's actually a recessive allele. And so it doesn't show up all the time, but it's very frequent. And that's the difference between that. That's one of the reasons they will study allele frequency, to be able to look at that. Then on 483, you have multiple allele inheritance. And this is where you have more than two types of alleles. So like for your eyes, you have brown and blue, but you also have hazel stuck in there somewhere, right? Or some other different things. For blood types, there's A, there's B, there's AB, and there's O. And then you've got even some branches off from that. But anyway, then there's multiple alleles, not just two for that. So that's multiple allele inheritance. Page 484, you have pleiotropy. This is where most genes influence not just one trait, but several seemingly unrelated traits. And this would be a lot of times with certain types of diseases. If you have this certain type of disease, then you are more prone to have this, this, and this kind of thing. Or if you have this, you might end up with this. So that's called pleiotropy, where one, if you have a certain type of something, then you're going to be um, more easily prone to these other types of traits. And then you have polygenic inheritance. And this is where it's kind of, these are kind of the opposites. Like the pleiotropy was one trait affected other things. Polygenic inheritance is where several traits influence one thing. So, like instead of one gene controlling expression, many genes would involve that. So, like skin color, for example, is influenced by 4 different genes. Height is another one that is influenced by 4 different genes. So, you can see what that is polygenic inheritance. Talks a little bit about hemophilia and color blindness. Those are sex-related disorders. Basically, that certain like if you're a male, you're going to be more prone to that, or if you're a female, you'd be more prone to something different. It just depends. Doesn't mean because you're a male that you'll get it. It just means there are more males that get hemophilia than females. There are more males that are colorblind than females. And it talks a little bit about that. So lots of genetic advances at this point. Some of them great. Some of them are used for good, being able to help mothers or parents or whatever in the womb. But then some of them are used for bad. And I remember whenever they wanted to test my children for things, and I would when they were in the womb, and I would always say, why would I need to know that? Can you do anything about it? And, well, no, they're wanting to see if you would want to terminate the pregnancy. Well, obviously, I didn't have any. I said, no, I don't want to know. Yeah, I don't want to. And some people just think it's better to prepare themselves for those things. But I said no. Sometimes it's just needless worry. So there's good advances in genetics. There's not so good advances in genetics. Eugenics is not so good one, where they basically are trying to improve the human race and produce a master race, kind of off of what Hitler ideas there. So there's some great things. We need Christian geneticists that actually have great morals, and they are trying to help people and not produce a master race or something bizarre like that. So anyway, so that's 23.1. I mean 3. Yeah, 23.3 or 4. I've done so many of them. So I hope you have a good day. Go back over these things. They're not easy.